The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to Starbridge. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar. Hopefully all of you can see my screen. Laura, can you see my screen?
I can see your screen, Sue.
Okay, thank you. Starbridge's mission is to partner with people with disabilities and their families to help them achieve their goals in education, employment, and healthy living, and our goal is to include everyone in their communities. Starbridge serves over 10,000 people each year, primarily in Rochester and the Finger Lakes area, and you can see here the many services that we offer. I want to emphasize that we are still open, still serving individuals and families, and anyone looking for our services can call this number, 585-546-1700, or visit our website at www.starbridgeinc.org to get started.
Sue, I noticed that it's not advancing your slides.
Oh dear, it's advancing on my screen. I'm a little troubled by this because I don't know what to do at this point. You're still seeing the main Starbridge screen, Laura?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to start over. I'm going to get out of. Can you see the PowerPoint here?
No, I still see the logo.
You still see the logo.
Why
How
don't you
bizarre.
just click share my screen again?
I'm going to do share screen again.
There, now we see it. Yep.
There it is. Okay, start from the beginning. Hello. I am so sorry about that. So there's the logo, and we
Great, you're all
got
set.
through this. Okay, very good. I am so sorry about that. So if anyone needs our services, please call the number that you see there. It's 585-546-1700, or visit our website at www.starbridgeinc.org. My name is Sue Wyatt. I'm a family education specialist at Starbridge, and I will be your moderator today. This webinar is funded by a grant from the U.S. Department of Education. If you need information on the current COVID situation, you can visit their website at www.ed.gov/coronavirus, and you can see all sorts of resources for students and teachers and families. A few housekeeping notes for our webinar. You're encouraged to participate by asking questions in the questions pane. We'll talk about that in a bit. And you also have several handouts that we'll show you how to access in a minute as well. Tomorrow you're going to be getting a survey from SurveyMonkey. Please fill that out. That helps us to improve our services, and it also provides feedback for our funders, and it helps us keep webinars like this and other services free for families. Here's a screen showing our GoToWebinar control panel. This illustration shows a collapsed panel, and you can click on that orange arrow up there to expand it, and then it will look like that. And you can ask your questions in the chat box below there, and once you hit send, the message will come to the moderator, which is me. If you have any trouble at all with your audio, you can switch to the telephone by pressing the telephone button, and at that point you'll get a phone number and a PIN number that you can use to access the audio portion of the webinar. Here's where you can find the handouts. There's a little handouts tab, and you can download the handouts from there at any time during the presentation. Now, one of the handouts is going to be the actual slides from this webinar. Let's start with a couple of polling questions. First off, we're going to find out who's joining us today. So are you a parent or family member? Are you an individual with a disability? Are you an education professional, a human service provider, or somebody else? And we've seen About half of the people voted. I'm going to leave that up for another moment or two. Okay, I'm going to close that poll and share the results. And we see that about a third of us are education professionals, about half are human service providers, and 17% are other. So I'm going to hide that now and launch our second poll. So what is the age of the individual that you're serving? Is it 0 to 8 years old, 9 to 14 years old, 15 to 21 years old, or over 21? And I'll wait a minute while people respond. Okay, I'm going to close that poll and share the results. And you'll see that we have about 57% who are working with individuals 0 to 8 years old, 29% the ages 9 to 14, 71% ages 15 to 21, and 0 for over 21. So thank you. I'm going to hide that poll now. And I'm going to introduce our presenter today. I'd like to introduce Laura Arrington. Laura is the Family and Youth Education Coordinator at Starbridge, and she has a wealth of experience working with families on special education issues. She's going to be presenting on functional behavior assessments and behavior intervention plans. Laura, I'm going to ask you to share your screen now.
Okay.
And take it away, Laura. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone again for just being here today and hearing some great information. We'll be taking questions at the end, so feel free to ask away. Also, I have some great handouts for you. It is the New York State Department of Education memo on functional behavior assessments. I'm someone who I like to know where is the regulation and where can I find some really great information, as well as behavior intervention plans. And then we also included use of a timeout room. And a guidance document for New York State Department of Education. I think this kind of goes hand in hand when we're talking about functional behavior assessments and behavior intervention plans. So, a lot of times people will ask me, is this only for older students? Could you get it for younger students? We see it a lot for younger students. And in fact, you can do them for students who are in preschool. So for those families who have young kiddos and things aren't going well and the daycare is saying, hey, this really isn't working out, it may be a time to start to look at, is this something that we can implement to support a student? So a few things we're going to talk about today so you know where we're going. We want to identify the qualities of a functional behavior assessment as well as a behavior intervention plan, or as I like to always call them, a positive behavior intervention plan. We're also going to increase your knowledge about the functions of behavior and talk a lot about those behaviors. We also want to identify when it's appropriate to request an FBA or a BIP. And we're going to talk about, and I'm going to give you a lot of language around the New York State regulations for functional behavior assessments, or as we like to call them, FBAs, and behavior intervention plans, or BIPs. We also want to recognize that there's multiple pathways to support a student. And I also want to start talking about where we start to support students. So again, we're going to start in general education, and we're going to move forward. And our end result here at Starbridge is always to help and support families and improve relationships and communication between families and school. So we typically ask why they continue to do something or why they can't do something. Instead, we need to ask what we can do that will help them. When we start to look at FBAs, it's really about what is the plan to help and support the student. Not so much what the student will do, but maybe what the adults around the student will do. So where do we start? It usually starts with this: some challenging behaviors. Problem behaviors must be understood within the context or in the setting in which they occur. The goal is to replace the unwanted behavior. It's very hard to just extinguish a behavior or totally get rid of one. Let's say hitting. We're going to try to replace it with something more appropriate. So adults often have two different approaches for dealing with challenging behaviors, and they're usually based on this belief. The belief is the child is a problem. So instead of the belief that the child has a problem, he's not giving me a hard time, he's having a hard time. And we really want to get to the why behind the behavior. All behaviors serve a purpose. So when we see this, take a moment and pause. What is going on here? Is he being defiant? Is he just getting up and walking out of the classroom? What else is going on? If we can predict challenging behaviors due to expectations or demands, is there something different that we can do to intervene? And that's what we really want to start to talk about, is what could we do? What is different? How can we approach this? And to sometimes take a pause and think about what is going on. And also look at, are we accelerating the behavior? You can see her fingers out and she's, pointing at him. So you feel frustration. So what is making him get up and walk out and leave the room? Remember, I talked about we want to start at the very basic level of where we always start with students, and we want to look at the different levels of support. And the first one is a tier 1 support. And we're going to go into great detail on each of these supports, but it's core universal instruction and support. This is usually general education. Then tier 2, targeted interventions. Again, this could still be looked at general education. And tier 3, which is usually intensive individual instruction, which is usually for a student with an IEP and sometimes a student with a 504. So what I want you to know is there's a progression, and we're going to talk about how we get through that progression, how the school works through that progression, but I also am going to talk about when safety comes into concern, you may jump right to tier 3, and that's okay. Tier 1, universal supports. Before identifying a student that needs an FBA, what we want to know is what can we do in general education? So tier 1 supports strong classroom management. School policy is usually the first line of support. What are the universal expectations for students? Do you know them? Does your child or the students that you work with know them? Do they understand them? How is it taught? And what does it look like? When they do the code of conduct, each school should have a code of conduct, and all students usually sign something at the beginning of the year. Is it written at the age level of your student? If they're a primary school student in K through 2nd grade, is it written at their level, and are they able to understand it? So we want to look at the when, the why, and the how. We're going to talk about, even at tier 1, it's something called function-based thinking. It's when the behavior you're curious about is not dangerous to your student or others, and it doesn't impede or interfere with the learning of others. I'm going to say that a lot throughout this training. When it becomes dangerous or it interferes with learning, then we may jump right to tier 3. Function-based thinking is truly a place to start. It's a mindset that we should do, or teachers should do naturally for students. The why is to try to understand the why the student is engaging in what we call low-level behavior. And it's because we want to try something different in the classroom to meet the needs of the student. And then it's the how. Think along the behavior pathway to guide your classroom practices of how you're going to do it, and we're going to cover some of that. Let's look at classroom expectations and school policy. So it's talking about strong classroom management, and school policies are the first line of supports for every student, whether you're in general education or special education. Have the rules been clearly taught? Are they posted somewhere? Do we go over them? Is there additional support to enhance the classroom strategies? What does this look like? The code of conduct, how to behave in assemblies. Most schools have what's called character education programs. It's about the acknowledgement and the relationship building. Is it positive? Is it warm? Is the classroom a great environment for learning? And I want to think about those things for students, especially as we move into what could possibly fall look like. If students are back, what will be nurturing, warm, inviting, and safe for a student when they come back to school? We also, when we talk about setting up classroom expectations, this is a very quick and easy way to what should your desk look like when you're ready for math? What does ready look like? What does ready look like for social studies? What does ready look like for math? You could do a model desk, and it's a great ready strategy for a classroom. Have a desk where everyone can see it, and have the students match the desk. It's nice to have the same reference point for every student every time, instead of them trying to figure out, look around, how do I do this? What am I doing? How do I get ready? Do I have to copy someone? What if the person I usually look to for ready isn't there? If you don't have time to prep for the desk before the next time, the teacher can just do it right in front of the students and let them see it so that they know what to do. This is setting up what's called classroom expectations. What does ready for math? Look, the pencil is out, the desk is open, there's not clutter on the desk. Match the desk. It's a visual support, and it's really helpful for students who struggle with auditory processing. Common universal practices that classroom expectations. Be safe. Well, what does safe look like? Be responsible. Well, what does responsible look like? Does it mean that you hang up your backpack, you hang up your coat, you take off your hat when you come in? Be respectful. What are kind words that you say to each other? Be ready. What does ready look like? And be peaceful. Those are usually practices that we see within a classroom, and they should be taught every day for students. Then this is a way to think about the 4 functions of behavior, a model for thinking about problematic behavior. You would look at, what does it do for me? Is it a sensory issue? Are they trying to escape? Do they need attention? Do they need something tangible? So when we look at when a student starts to do things, we do, what does it do for them? And when does it happen? And this is starting to get into that function-based thinking of why they're doing it. They're doing it for attention. Well, what kind of attention? And for some students, even negative attention is attention. Are they escaping? Why are they escaping? So the goal of function-based thinking is for a teacher to independently think functionally about problematic student behavior and select an intervention that serves the same function without the support of multiple team meetings. Something's going on, something is happening, and they're just thinking, what is going on and how can I support? So let's give an example. A student frequently calls out during independent reading. So in the past, the teacher gives them a detention, the student leaves the classroom, works one-on-one during the detention to complete the assignment. tomorrow the same scenario plays out. So we start to look at this and say, what is the function of behavior? Why does the student want to leave the classroom? Why do they need one-on-one support? What is the deficit? What is the thing that we need to do to support this student? So when we start to see the behaviors, I love when families call me and they say, oh, they say my child's disengaged. And the first thing I'll say is, well, what does that look like? Because disengaged can mean so many different things for so many students. I'm that person. I love to be a detective, and I want to find the why behind the behavior. If you think about it, students don't wake up every day and say, I want to go to school, have a behavior, and get suspended. Just like we don't say, I want to go to work, get in a fight with a coworker, and get written up or get fired. People don't think that way. So what we have to say is, what is going on? What happened before the behavior? What is the work we're going to do after the behavior? So we see this little girl. What's going on here? What do you think? Is she playing hide and seek? Is she avoiding a task? Does she have sensory overload? What would make a child crawl under a desk? I get this a lot. My child crawled under a desk. Why? So when we look at tier 1, when the behavior you're curious about is not dangerous. Is this dangerous? No, no one's getting hurt. It might be annoying, but it's not dangerous. And is it interfering or impeding on the student's ability to learn? Okay, so it depends on how long they're under a desk. If they're under a desk all day long, the answer may be yes. I've actually been in classrooms of some students with special needs where I've seen them, service providers actually crawl under the desk with the student and deliver the service. Truly an amazing thing I've seen them accomplish. So we want to look at how long are they sitting under the desk, but no one's getting hurt. Is this a one-time thing? What's going on? And there it is again. Be curious about the behavior. I love to practice being curious about behaviors that aren't dangerous to the students and interfering with other students in their learning. And we want to think about the why. If the child is able to tell us, why did you crawl under the desk? That would be great. 9 times out of 10, they might not be able to have any idea why. So we're going to start to look at how do we then logically pick apart that process. And we look at 3 things. It's the ABCs: antecedent, behavior, and consequence. And we're going to go over each one of these. So the first thing is the antecedent, the trigger. What ignited the behavior? Now, this is tricky because sometimes we get, for no apparent reason, the student came in and kicked over a desk. What we need to figure out is what happened before they came in. So we like to say, well, when we start going back, let's pretend that the student woke up and they had no clean pants. So they had to put on a pair of dirty pants. They went downstairs, their favorite cereal was gone. They get on the bus, it's loud, it's noisy, they forgot their homework. They walk in, oh, there's the substitute teacher. And then someone touches or pushes them, not intentionally, and for no apparent reason, the student kicked over the desk. Now I'm going to ask you, what do you think? No apparent reason the student kicked over the desk? When we become curious about the behavior, we start to dig a little deeper. What happened before? What happened before that? Then we look at the behavior itself. Well, what is it? Is it yelling? Okay, what is the behavior? Crawling under the desk, yelling, hitting, spitting, biting. Yeah, I'm going all over for all of those. Defiant. And we're going to talk a lot about some of those behaviors of what's defiant, what is inappropriate, what is disengaged. Then we're going to look at the consequences. And this is really important to remember. Consequences is what happened as a direct result of the behavior. It is not what we do to a student. It is not a punishment. It's what the student gains from doing the behavior. So if a student repeatedly engages in a behavior, there's a payoff. It serves a function. Solving the puzzle requires identification of the behavior, the function. So it's the consequence. Remember when we talked about the one student who frequently yelled out during class and was sent out of class and got to work one-on-one? That's the consequence. What did they gain? They gained out of classroom one-on-one support. So what does that mean? Maybe that means we need to do a little digging on, does the student need more supports in school? Do they understand the material? Maybe we need to do a full evaluation for Committee on Special Education to find out if there's a learning disability. I once worked with a high school principal who said when he got to high school, he could barely read and write. And he was the biggest behavior problem they had ever seen. And he would come into especially English class and get kicked out every single day. And that's exactly what he wanted. And it wasn't until a teacher dug a little deeper and kept thinking, why does he want to leave? What is it that the student needs? And they discovered he had severe dyslexia. Once they discovered that and they started implementing supports and services, he began to read and write and, of course, go on to not only get a master's in education, but a degree in administrative support and become a principal. Truly an amazing story when we become curious about behaviors. All behaviors serve a purpose. So let's talk about what happens. Tier 1 isn't working. It's not working. We've implemented some stuff. There's still some issues going on. So what could be some types of supports for Tier 2? A check-in and check-out. So that's somebody who checks in with the person every day. How you doing? Maybe before or after math. What's going on? Do you know what ready is? Do you have your math? Do you have your homework? How was last night? And again, a lot of times we work with a variety of students, and we need to remember that all students don't have the same home life. I've worked with families who've had the police at their house all night, and a parent was arrested. Do you think that student's homework's going to be handed in? So a check-in and a check-out person can really be that person who finds out that something happened in the home, get to another teacher and say, hey, please don't, get on them about the math homework. They had a family crisis last night. Very important. Social skills support. That could be social skills groups and talking about how to be a friend, how to not get so close. A lot of students on the spectrum really benefit from social skills support. Having a reflection sheet. How did you feel today during math? How are you feeling today? Tier 2 is really some small group strategies. Again, we're looking at low level, targeted interventions. And it should be tied to some data collection. If a student is struggling with behaviors, the teacher may receive assistance. They have usually school-based teams who can come in and help and adjust as necessary. Remember, the behavior is not dangerous at this point. You're still curious about it, and you're still doing the function-based thinking. And you could be making some adjustments to the environment. So what does that mean? Maybe it's their desk away from a window. Maybe it's sitting on a ball. Maybe it's something to squeeze. Maybe it's a timer. Maybe it's a schedule written out. You're still curious. Nothing is dangerous. And the learning is still taking place. So those are important things to remember at this point. So what is Tier 3? It's highly intensive individual support. Now we're going to start talking about an FBA. You've gone through Tier 1. It's still not working. Tier 2, you're still getting calls from the school. So now we want to look at initiating a functional behavior assessment. And a teacher or parent can request an FBA. It's highly intensive supports for the student. It's really a wraparound team, and it can include a behavior specialist, a therapist. It may even include a PINS, a person in need of intervention, or a FACS person or a counselor, either inside the school or outside the school, and the family. So when should you request a functional behavior assessment? Well, when previous interventions you have tried have not been successful, then an FBA needs to be done. Remember, a teacher or a parent can request it, and you can request it at any time. Please know a parent can request this at any time. For students with disabilities, the development of an FBA ensures that the student is in their least restrictive environment, and that's where they're successful. Not all students go through the FBA process will get a behavior plan, but we're going to talk about what that looks like. So how do we get it started? You request one in writing to the CSE chairperson, always in writing, always to the Committee on Special Education chairperson, not to the teacher, not to the school psychologist, not to the school principal. In writing, and keep a copy for yourself. I always suggest once you've submitted it, it is an assessment. You want to follow up and just make sure that they've received it. Give them 5 to 6 days. Send a follow-up email. I just want to make sure you received my evaluation. So what is the functional behavior assessment? Well, that comes in what's called Part 200 of the New York State regulations, and you can actually go online to the New York State Department of Education and type in Part 200s, and you can receive those. So the language says the FBA means the process of determining why a student engages in a behavior that impedes learning and how the behavior relates to the environment. This will be a data collection process. Remember how I had talked about that it's an assessment? Well, we need parental consent. So you can get it started, the school gets it, and then they need your consent. So for students with disabilities, the results are shared with the Committee on Special Education, and if needed, the IEP is updated. It's also can be considered a reevaluation. So for those of you who have IEPs, remember that should be included. They should look at it annually at your annual reviews. And then, as you know, every 3 years you have a triennial, and you would want to just look that over and make sure that it's working. So if you're still like, geez, I see this behavior, but I'm just not sure, when should a behavior assessment be requested? Well, this is always my number one question. Are they leaving the room? Are they being sent to the principal's office? Are they spending more time in the principal's office than they are? Are you being asked to pick up your child because there's a problem? If this continues to happen, what are we doing that's different? And I want to keep that in mind, and I say that to everyone. Keep in mind, what are we going to do? Suspending a student and bringing them back when they've had a behavior? What will we do that's different? If we don't do anything different, how likely will the behavior occur again? When we're looking at maybe a more restrictive environment, and we do get this a lot of times we get someone who will say, my son, came in and they flipped a desk and they're really upset and they think they need to go to an outside placement. The first question I'm going to ask you is, do they have an FBA plan or behavior intervention plan? If the answer is no, we like to say, hold on, let's get one started. Again, before we move them to a more restrictive environment, let's look. Now, there are some exceptions, and the exceptions could be, we always say violence, weapons, and it could be serious drugs. So when we get to that point, sometimes all bets are off, but hopefully before you get to that point, you'll be calling us and talking with us. So I did say I was going to include information on what a functional behavior assessment is, and this is where you get it right from the Part 200s. It's straight out of there. Most important piece is the functional behavior assessment is based on multiple sources, including but not limited to information obtained from direct observation, information from the student, their teachers, any related service providers, a review of any previous data or records. It should not be based solely on the history of the problem that's going on. Multiple sources. Remember, it's an assessment, just like when you get evaluated for special education services. You want multiple sources. So the first thing they want to do is they want to get a baseline of the student's behavior. We want to look at the frequency. So the number of times the behavior occurred. How many times did Johnny leave the room? Oops, I apologize. There it goes. The amount of time, so the duration. How long was Johnny out of his seat? And then the intensity of the behavior. That's the amount of force or energy. Did they punch? Did they kick? Did they hit? Was there a mark? So here's kind of an example of someone collecting some data. So what we know is we know the date. So that's good. We know how the date that it occurred, we know when it started, we know when it stopped. We know that it lasted for 3 minutes and it happened during math. Now we get a tantrum, any flopping on the ground with loud vocalizations with or without tears. So I am struggling with this a little bit because does every tantrum look like that? So good start. I need more detailed information. Were they, and I do like the fact that they say a tantrum and then they described it, but was this exactly what they saw on October 17th, October 18th, and October 19th? With or without tears? I don't know if that really matters, but it can be helpful. Oops. So here's another version. Here's a behavior. We know the behavior right here is hitting. Okay. Now, if you call me and say, Laura, my child got a 2-day suspension for hitting another student. I'm going to ask you the questions. Was it an open hand? Was it a closed hand? Was it a slap? These are really important pieces of information. I once worked with a family where they said a young man had stabbed another student with a pencil. And the more I asked, and luckily we were in a superintendent's hearing and I was able to ask when they stabbed them, and that sounds pretty scary. Did they leave a mark? No, there wasn't a mark. Was there blood? No, there wasn't blood. Did the student require a Band-Aid? No, they did not require a Band-Aid. And I said, so it sounds like they got poked with a pencil. Being stabbed with a pencil or poked with a pencil are two different things. When we come to behaviors, I'm going to ask a lot of questions, and I want you to ask a lot of questions too. The good news is we know when the behavior occurred, I think, because what I don't know is the date. I don't know if it happened at 9:15 and then 10:05 and then 10:23 and 10:40 and 11:30. Did it all happen on that date? I know the severity because it was very severe, but how severe? I would need more of a description. Again, when you start to see tracking, good start, and they're saying, number 4, intense is dangerous. I need to know what kind of hitting. Did they hit him in the face? Was it an open fist, a closed fist? Great questions that we want to ask and know about. So the data is the observations, and we want to take a look at it, and we want to survey all providers, not just one person. We want to get people to come in and look at this. Usually, functional behavior assessments are done by the school psychologist. And we want to talk to the student and the parent. The two most important people. Well, the most important person is the student. If we can talk to them and maybe they can articulate why. I just get so angry. I get so angry I can't even think. Important information, things that we want to help and support the students. Parents, do you see this at home? A lot of times I will tell you we see behaviors at home, at school, but not at home, because at home, home's preferred, and school is hard tasks. And for a student who may, on top of everything else, have a learning disability, it's going to be really important that we find out more information. And where are we going to get it? From the family. So then we're going to look at getting everyone together. So we've done a little research. We started the assessment. It should be a collaborative problem-solving process used to address the challenging behavior. Once the data is collected from observation, input from service providers, parents, and students, a meeting should occur. You want to discuss what the child's strengths are, their challenges, and what clues from observations do you have and from doing your evaluation. You want to develop almost a hypothesis regarding the function of the behavior. And when we start to develop a behavior plan, it has to be positive and it has to be proactive. So when you're looking at an FBA, you want to look beyond the behavior and focus and identify on all the other significant factors. So if we look out this window, we see the grass. But did you notice the trees in the background? We see behaviors, but we need to be curious about what the underlying factors are. Is it social? Is it sensory? Is it physical? Is it cognitive? Is it environmental? We need to figure out what the student needs. I know I keep saying we need to figure out what the student needs. I can't tell you how many I see that says, John will act appropriately. Well, how does John act appropriately if we, as the adults, don't demonstrate and teach it? So we want to start developing the behavior plan. When a student exhibits persistent behaviors, this is totally exaggerated, but I love it, that impede on their learning and the learning of others, despite consistently implementing general school-wide classroom interventions, or if the student's behavior places themselves or other students at risk or harm. Okay. So risk or harm, running away, and I use this a lot. My son was a runner, so I always would tell his one-to-one aide, who sometimes showed up in really beautiful, nice shoes, you're going to need sneakers because he's fast. So the student behaviors places them or others at risk or harm of injury. If you're running out of the building every day, absolutely, that's going to be a challenge, and we need to figure out how to keep a student safe, and we need to also figure out why they're running. So when do we develop the BIP is when the CSE or even the Committee on Preschool Education is considering a more restrictive program or placement because of their behavior. Remember, it needs to be reviewed annually, but good practice is for it to be done often. And it also appears on the evaluation of the IEP. So according to Part 200s, what we need to do is identify the problem behavior, include the definition of the behavior in what's called concrete terms. So concrete terms are measurable and observable terms that make it concrete. Okay, and we're going to talk about what is a concrete behavior. So we see this. Hit hands with others. Is it concrete? Let's think about that. Remember what I had talked about. Is it open hand? Is it closed hand? Is it a slap? So is this statement right here truly concrete? I'm going to say no. I want to be curious, I want to be a detective, and I want to ask more questions. Cry. Well, okay, I'm going to say cry could probably be concrete. You're crying, that's a behavior. Angry. This one I struggle with sometimes. Sometimes my son is annoyed, but it may appear to others that he's angry. So again, I want to dig. I want to find out what he does. Who do we want to involve? Student, parents, who are going to know this child better and be able to just describe. We may find out that angry and upset or annoyed maybe looked very different. Spit. I would say yes. I always do say, was it kind of that where they kind of go with their more of a raspberry, or did they intentionally spit? I do like to find deeper detail. I do know, especially in this day and age of health and hygiene, spitting is very is low in the tolerance because of health and hygiene. And I can't stress that enough to families, but I do always try to find out when you tell me spit, I want to ask questions. Flip over a desk. If you think about it, flipping over a desk, concrete, you see it, you can, yep, it's measurable, observable, yep, we flipped over the desk. Is mean. I see this a lot. This, again, is kind of a gray area. What does is mean look like? So if you get a report that your child has this behavior and you're constantly hearing is mean to others, give me an example, describe it. Non-compliant. I get this one a lot. Think about it. What does non-compliant mean? A lot of times I'll hear, my son pulls his hoodie over his head and puts his head down on the desk. Is he tired? Does he not feel good? Does he not know how to do this? And tantrum. We saw the description earlier in a previous tracking sheet, but what does the tantrum look for this child? Remember, when you've met one child with behaviors, you've met just one child. So we want to dig and find out, what does the tantrum look like? What is going on? Oh, and my favorite one is inconsiderate. What does that mean? It's not a concrete. Could say, the child told me, and maybe it's a swear word, and then they put the swear word in. That is very helpful, but what does inconsiderate look like? Remember, everyone has a different definition. So a behavior intervention plan, again, right out of the Part 200s, you will have this in the PowerPoint in your handouts. They exhibit persistent behaviors that impede or interfere with his or her learning or that of others, despite consistently implementing school-wide or classroom-wide interventions. And then second piece is, the student's behavior places him or her or others at risk of harm or injury. I know you're probably like, I get it, Laura, we hear this all the time. But those are the things, when you call us or when you work with us, we're going to be asking those questions. So the behavior intervention plan should clearly state what should be taught, how it will be taught, and how success will be measured. So we want to include regular progress monitoring of the frequency, the duration, and intensity of the behavior interventions. Very important information, because when it's not working, we want to go back, we want to look at the data. So the results of the progress monitoring should be documented and reported to the student's parents and to also the Committee on Special Education or Committee on Preschool Special Education. And it should be revised, either in their BIP or in their IEP. So what's included in a behavioral intervention plan? Well, it's a description of the problem of the behavior and a specific hypothesis as to why the problem occurs. So again, when we're talking about a hypothesis, You may have to try to figure it out. This is why we think the student's doing the behaviors. We also want to look at interventions and strategies. It should be positive supports. A good plan changes the environments and the supports. It should not be that when John does not comply or refuses to do his math, he's sent to the principal's office. That's not a positive support. Or he loses free time on the playground. Positive intervention should teach the appropriate behavior, model the appropriate behavior, and we want to recognize and reward the appropriate behavior. Remember in the beginning, I talked that you can't extinguish it. You need to replace that behavior, and we want to reward when we see that. Doesn't mean they get candy all day long, but it does mean that it could be great job, keep up the good work. Remember, behavioral support is not the redesign, is the redesign of the environment, not the redesign of the individual. So for the BIP, it should be updated annually. If the student is getting suspended, it needs to be updated. If you implemented the behavior plan and the student got suspended, what do you think? Yeah, we need to update and change the plan because it's not working. So remember, teach preventative strategies for problems behaviors. And how can we respond to an inappropriate behavior that will not reinforce an inappropriate behavior? So how do we typically respond to an inappropriate behavior? Be curious about the consequence or the payoff. If we overreact, we may be reinforcing the behavior with the desired option. When the student is repeatedly suspended from school and gets to avoid learning, how can we respond in ways that will not reinforce the appropriate behavior? Are we doing restorative practices? Are we doing restorative circles with the students and helping and supporting them as we go? It was interesting. My son went through a phase where he was young and he loved to tell everybody to shut up. And the first time he said it, I was like, what did you say? And of course, then he said it again. And I'm like, oh my gosh, my in-laws are going to freak out. And what I discovered is I started doing planned ignoring of when he yelled, shut up. And then we also started talking about what he could do instead. John, you could say, please stop talking. Please leave me alone. I'm having a hard time. So we would work on those types of strategies because that's way better than saying shut up. It's a progression. But if we reacted like I kept doing, going, what did you say? Oh my gosh. Then he kept doing it. So again, and I can't stress this enough with suspension. If your child gets suspended, then the behavior intervention plan needs to be updated. Ask, what will we do differently so the student does not get suspended? Nobody wants to get suspended. Do you want to get suspended from work? I know I don't. So why would students want to get suspended from school? We need to be curious. We as the adults need to figure out how we can support the student and then teach the student appropriate strategies. Before we're almost done, I want to leave you with this. It's my favorite quote. Remember, everyone in the classroom has a story that leads to misbehavior or defiance. 9 times out of 10, the story behind the misbehavior won't make you angry. It will break your heart. Please remember that these are kids. They need our help and support. We are here for you at Starbridge. So with that being said, Sue, if you have any questions, I know I rambled on, but feel free to go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Laura. I do have a few questions. The first one is regarding custody and consent. And the question is, if the child custody is split, for example, between father, mother, grandmother, does the school need all 3 signatures before doing an FBA?
Oh, that's a really great question. I'm going to answer it. I'm going to try to answer it to the best of my ability. And what I will share with you is I sit on a board of education, so I will say, based on what I'm hearing, is I would say whoever, who does mail go to, who gets notified from school, usually there's someone who has primary custody. So if there's a CSE meeting, who is that primary person? In that case, I'm going to say it wouldn't hurt to check in with the chairperson because it is an evaluation, or check your divorce proceedings and see who has the custody. School usually can tell you what custody or what consent they need, if that's helpful. And you can probably usually call your main office and talk to the secretary at whatever building that is, and they should be able to help you with that.
Okay, thank you, Laura. I have another question. Does the student need to be identified as a student with a disability in order to get a functional behavior assessment and a behavior plan, or is the behavior itself considered a disability?
Okay, that is a great question. The first answer is no, the student does not have to have a disability to get a functional behavior assessment. My second question is maybe what's going on? Is it interfering with their learning? Is their behavior? If it's interfering with their learning, you may want to request a full CSE evaluation and also ask for a behavior. So intervention plan. So I would look at those two things of saying, are they doing anything that's dangerous? Are they doing anything that's interfering with their learning or the learning with others? If your answer is yes, then you may also want to involve the Committee on Special Education because it sounds like they might be at a tier 3. So great question. Are you there, Sue? Okay, so Sue, I don't hear you. And I'm not sure if you have the mute on. Okay, so I see the next question is if parents do not participate or refuse to recognize the behavior intervention, how do we deal with this? So that's a really great question. How do you deal with that? My question would be, I always like to think what's going on with the family. How do we reach out? How do we find out why they refuse to recognize the behavior plan? Do they think it's not a good representation or it wasn't done well? Do they feel that it was done without their support? I'm curious, so I'm asking those questions of what's going on with the parent, what's going on, why do they not support it, and how can we help to support them and make them feel a part of it. I hope that answers the question, and but feel free, you can type it in the question pane if there's more to that, but I hope that was helpful. Again, if the student's getting suspended or if the student is not learning and they feel that it's still not appropriate, let's sit down and kind of hash that out of why. So I see, what if they do not want to recognize it? So I'm guessing that if the parents don't recognize the behavior plan, I would want to dig a little deeper with the families of why they don't recognize it. Do they not feel that the behavior is appropriate, that they're okay with the behavior? And I will tell you, I've worked with a variety of different parents. We've had and I'm going to say, for example, in this day and age, we've had kids who have written threats to the school. And the family has called and said, well, it was no big deal because they weren't really going to carry it out. And what I say is, well, in this day and age, it does matter a lot. Or there was one where it was a middle school student who kept smacking young girls on their bottoms. And they said, there's no intent. They're not really trying to hurt them. And I said, in this day and age, you can't put your hands on other people. You're just not allowed. And I will say that even with a student who has a developmental disability, you're not allowed to do that. So how do we help and teach? And sometimes, with working with this parent, if they feel that if they don't want to recognize that, this could be a pathway to the student actually going to a more restrictive environment. So I like to set them up to say, I know you don't believe in this, but if the school doesn't follow it, it could mean that your son or daughter could end up in a more restrictive environment, and we need your support behind it. So I hope that was helpful.
Thank you, Laura. I have one more question. Could outside therapists be consulted for an FBA?
They can. I have seen it happen. I do sometimes see when families will say, we've worked with the school psychologist and we just don't have a good relationship, and you could ask if somebody from outside. I usually see it if maybe they did a functional behavior assessment and you don't agree with the results. And again, with any evaluation, once you have the initial evaluation, you can then request for oh my gosh, I'm losing the term, the private evaluation, independent evaluation at school district expense. So I would say, in order to get to that step without you having to fund that, I would have the school initially do it, review it, look at it, talk about whether you feel that it's appropriate, and then from there, uh, you can request an independent evaluation.
Okay. Thank you. One more came in.
Again, Sue, for some reason you have, I don't hear you. So I see two. So one is, what steps can a parent take if the school is trying to transfer their child to another facility? And again, this is always the piece of, when we talk about discipline and suspension, what is going on and what is the behavior? When we get to weapons, violence, and serious drugs, those are the types of things that you can really jump. And when I say drugs, I'm not talking about marijuana. I'm talking about, something much more, far more dangerous. And when we're talking about weapons, it could be a big knife, it could be a gun, those types of things. Violence. Did somebody, did a nose get broken? Were there stitches? Did they need, to go to urgent care? So sometimes with those types of behaviors, you jump quickly to those you could jump quickly to being sent out of district. And there's a lot of times that there's not many choices. There's very few times that public schools can say no thank you, but public schools will then need to find you an appropriate placement to get the appropriate help and support. If it is something where there's a behavior and it's starting to interfere with the others, they're clearing classrooms, people are getting hurt, that is the time to have a meeting. Now, what I want you to know is that as families, you always have your due process rights. You can, one, request mediation at any time, and it's free for families. Or you can request an impartial hearing, which usually the school will bring their attorney and you would get an attorney. And at Starbridge, we can refer you to some attorneys that are very skilled in that. So I always want you to know that you always have due process rights. There's another one. Do you have any tips on how to be curious about what's going on at home without being intrusive? And this is, the million-dollar question. How do we help? How do we gain trust for families? And that's not an easy thing to do. Could you meet with a family offsite? Could you go to the home? But not unannounced. Please announce. Please let them know how you want to help. Who is in the school? Who's a trusted person? Who could help? Who they trust? Who you could help to get them the supports that they need. There's no easy answer for this, but what I do always recognize is that sometimes families come with their experiences as well that happened in school, and we want to help and support those students. So what is it that this family needs? And sometimes we've even seen families who are really in need of a place to live, but they do not want help from the school. So are there other agencies that can come in and help and not judge? And coming in and helping and not judging is definitely a challenge. So, talk to your school social worker, talk to a trusted teacher or person. And then I see one more question, and it's an interesting question. Can a weapon be scissors? Well, I'm going to tell you, technically it doesn't meet the definition, but I'm going to say that depends, and it depends on how they were used. I've seen things that basically a blade as long as like those little Swiss Army knives aren't technically considered a weapon. Anything larger than that is, and you can go out on the New York State Department of Ed website and look at the definition of weapons. But I have seen things, I've seen a pencil be labeled as a weapon. So the curiosity in me says, how was this weapon used? Or not weapon, how were the scissors used? Was someone hurt? Was there blood? Were there stitches? When I say were they required medical attention, did they need a Band-Aid or a bandage? Did they go to urgent care? I've had someone tell me that their child got into a fight and they sent a video that was taken, and it people went to the hospital. So when we hear that, it kind of takes us to another level. So how do we help and support these students? So can scissors be a weapon? It depends on what they did with the scissors. So I hope that was helpful. Sue, are you still there?
I have recovered my internet now. We had a temporary power failure
Oh
here,
my
so I
gosh, I'm so
apologize.
sorry. I think there's a storm rolling in. So thank you,
Yeah.
everybody. And the good news is Sue and I know how to do this, so I can see the questions too.
I'm so grateful that you could do that, because if you're relying on me, I was like, oh no, I have to get back in. So thank you for everybody for being patient with us.
And I think, Sue, when are we doing the proactive advocacy? There's another one coming up as well.
That is a week from today at the same time. So it's Thursday, June 4th at noon. And we're going to be discussing proactive advocacy, what that is, and how you can achieve it.
Great. And we have some really great webinars coming up. We've got stuff on going from early intervention to committee on preschool and preschool to school age. And we have understanding all the graduation requirements as well. And we have people from the New York State FACE Parent Center who will be doing those with us. So please check out our website. We've got a lot of great things coming up for you.
Absolutely. And keep checking back from time to time, because it is changing almost on a weekly basis.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.